Good afternoon, everyone. I am here to lecture on the male and female reproductive systems. You see me looking off to the side. I'm looking at the PowerPoint presentation that has been posted for you to access in regard to male and female reproductive systems and the chapters in the textbook. As you can see, I'm dressed like I just came from a funeral. That's because I did. And that's what we do. It's a Saturday afternoon, and you know, Saturdays are really good funeral days, so I had to work a service, but I wanted to make sure that I came to you to present some of the information that you'll need to make sure that you review in preparation for your quiz next Thursday on the male and female reproductive systems. That's the first thing I wanted to say. Got a couple of things. The second thing I want to say is don't forget that your case study is also due on Thursday. But you had to make sure, or you have to make sure because you still have time, that you submit a topic to me for approval. This has to be done by tomorrow. I have received a few, but the majority of the class has not sent me an email to state what either their male or their female disease or disorder that they wanted to do will be. Be mindful of the fact that if you send it too late on tomorrow, I may not be able to respond to you in a sufficient amount of time, only because I go to bed pretty early. And if you respond too late in the evening, then you may not get a response from me. It is your responsibility to make sure that you submit it in a timely fashion. The reason why I want you to submit a topic before you just start beginning to work on a topic is because I don't want too many people doing the same thing. I don't want anybody to doing the same thing. In fact, our class size is small enough, and there are enough of diseases and disorders out there that nobody should have to do the same one. You can either look at something that you'll find in the textbook, or you can find one, or if you know of someone that has a particular condition that you're interested in learning a little bit more about, I would suggest that you do so. Don't just take one because it's easy. Take something because you want to know about it. So please make sure you do that. Be mindful of the fact that tomorrow is Sunday. I do attend church services, and it is Palm Sunday. So if you send an email and I do not readily respond, you don't have to continue to email me over and over saying, did you get it? Did you get it? I got it. And as soon as I have an opportunity, I will make sure that I respond and let you know whether or not your topic has been approved. And then finally, I seemingly left all of my material for this chapter in my office. So I'm going to give you some general information on this video lecture. If I find that there's information that I have skipped, missed, or otherwise want you to know from the textbook. Sorry, I just saw someone coming up to the house. If I find that there's other information when I get into my office on Monday, I will advise you of that. I will come back with another or subsequent video lecture if it's required because there is additional information that I want you to know. So I just wanted to bring that to you, but I did not want to let the day go by without you having some of the information explained to you. Okay, so having said that, hopefully you have your textbook and all of your materials, even though I don't have mine. I do have access to the PowerPoint presentation, and there are just a few things that I want you to make sure that you review from either anatomy or anatomy. There you go. If you no longer have your anatomy notes or your anatomy textbook, you can still go to the website, which is www.mhhe.com/shear13, and you can access the information there chapter by chapter. I can't remember what chapter the male and female reproductive systems are in, but you should be able to access those and find that information. In addition to that, at the back of this textbook, you know that the appendices actually kind of review that anatomy that you may need to know prior to talking about the diseases for any given organ system. So, having said that, what I suggest that you do is this. Make sure you know the functions of our reproductive system. Go back all the way back to the transport, the maintenance, the production of the gametes. Go back and find out what gametes are. You should have access to that information. If for whatever reason you can't find it, none of your classmates seemingly know, please make sure that you ask me prior to Thursday. So if you need to shoot me an email or say, Ms. Jones, I just don't know what the answer to this is, that's fine. But please do so prior to Thursday, because I can't guarantee that I will answer you on Thursday. In addition to that, make sure you refamiliarize yourself with the process of meiosis. Remember, we talked about mitosis and that normal body cells undergo that process. However, the sex cells undergo meiosis. And the difference is that in mitosis, at the end of that, the end product are two cells that are identical to the original parent cell. That's not the case in meiosis. And remember, in meiosis, we have two different kinds because we're talking about male and female. One was called spermatogenesis, the other was called oogenesis. Make sure you know the end products of both of those. Okay. As you continue to go on, I'm just going to scroll through my PowerPoint here. As we start with the female reproductive system, the first slide goes into the function of it, but make sure you know the function overall for both of the male and female reproductive system. And then the inclusive structures. For both male and female, make sure that you remember what the structures are and what their functions are. So please make sure, if you cannot recall that information, look in your textbook. I believe it's also, once again, printed in there, but if it's not, it's definitely in the anatomy information. Okay, I'm moving on through the introduction component of it, and I've gone straight to the inflammatory or degenerative diseases. Endometriosis. Endometriosis is going to require that you recall the layers of the uterus. So endo, that prefix is already telling us that means the inner layer of that particular organ. So that would be the inner lining, the lining of the uterus is inflamed. Endocervicitis, remember the cervix is the lower 1/3 of the uterus. So not only is the inner lining, but also the lower 1/3 is inflamed as well. Salpingitis does not necessarily lend itself to what's inflamed, but that would be inflammation of the fallopian tubes. And remember, the fallopian tubes have other names. They can also be called, it can also be referred to as the oviduct and fallopian tubes, oviduct, and uterine tubes. Okay. Ophritis, that's inflammation of the ovaries. Remember, the ovaries are responsible for production of the egg, and the egg is an ovum. Plural for that would be ova. Vaginitis, I believe that it speaks for itself. Uteritis and metritis are synonymous. It's inflammation of the uterus. Now, that could be one or more linings. It could be the uterus in its entirety, but it's inflammation of the uterus. Okay, as you continue on, of course, other inflammatory and degenerative diseases would include any of the sexually transmitted diseases. This includes syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, herpes, and when you get to microbiology, we'll talk about all the different microorganisms that lead to these sexually transmitted diseases. And in addition to that, how those diseases can be passed from the mother to the unborn child. Okay, I'm going to try and click on the ectopic pregnancies and the tubular pregnancies. Actually, I'm not even going to click on those because you can click on them and you can actually see the diagrammatic representations. I believe one of them is actually kind of a short video to show you what happens in an ectopic pregnancy, sometimes referred to as a tubular pregnancy, because what the ovum is actually supposed to do, once it is fertilized in the fallopian tube, it's supposed to travel through the fallopian tube down and implant into the lining of the uterus. This does not always happen in every case, and sometimes that egg will actually lodge itself and implant within the fallopian tube. This is what we call an ectopic or tubular pregnancy. As a result, once it begins to implant, those cells begin to proliferate very, very rapidly, and the fetus begins to grow. Well, the zygote, which is the fertilized egg, becomes the fetus that implants and begins to grow. Well, obviously, the fallopian tubes cannot accommodate the fetus, and eventually it leads to the rupturing of the fallopian tube, and obviously it can lead to not only the death of the fetus, but it can lead to the death of the mother as well. So make sure you click on those links so you can see the different gross images, as well as, I don't think there's a microscopic view, but the gross images of ectopic pregnancy, as well as the video to show you what actually happens. And in one of those, I know you can actually see, I believe that there were a set of twins, so don't negate that. Okay, the next condition is eclampsia, and preeclampsia goes along with this. Now, I know I want to elaborate a little bit more on that, and I have a link that I want to post for you to access in regard to eclampsia. Preeclampsia is a condition that can occur where the mother's blood pressure can go up very high. It can be fatal to the mother if preeclampsia progresses to eclampsia, which is also characterized by seizures and high blood pressure, and it's more prevalent in African American women, Latino women, women who are 40 or over or around those ages. So make sure that you read that information in regard to that. And there's one other thing I want to say to that. In my entire career as being a funeral director and embalmer, I can recall two situations that really resonated with me when I was working in the funeral home. Within just a few months of each other, we had two mothers that actually died during childbirth. And the interesting thing about it, both of them had the same condition, eclampsia. One mother died and the baby survived, and the other, both of them, died as a result of complications from that condition. So make sure you read that information and you understand the dangers that are posed to the mother as a result of preeclampsia progressing to eclampsia. The next slide goes into the hyperplasia and neoplastic conditions and diseases that occur. Endometriosis is a condition that can lead to, or that believe can potentially be linked to cervical cancer. Because what happens is those endometrial cells that are normally on the inside of the uterus implant themselves outside of the uterus and other places of the body. Potentially, these cells can become cancerous and lead to cervical cancer, as well as other types of cancer, depending upon where the cells actually migrate. Dermoid cysts. Dermoid cysts are what we commonly call sometimes boils. And the dermoid cyst, derma is telling you it's within the skin, but these cysts, because so much bacteria and other matter can be within this area, because a cyst is just a fluid filled or air filled or semi-solid filled sac. And the propensity for infection is greater when there is material inside of the cyst. So that's why we list dermoid cyst under the hyperplasia, because that's an not the abnormal proliferation of cells, but it's the increase in the number of cells and potentially the increase of size as well. Cervical cancer, I've discussed a minute ago, and then breast cancer as well as another hyperplastic or neoplastic condition. One of the things I do want to alert you, excuse me one second. Okay, one of the things that I did want to say that I just lost my thought. Oh, yes, okay. As far as the order of decomposition, and this is something that you'll learn more when you get to embalming, the order of decomposition normally in normal remains, you would be able to identify if a case is decomposing by observing the lower right quadrant of the abdomen. If it's beginning to turn greenish in color, then that's an indication that that particular case is beginning to decompose. However, in pregnant remains, because the fetus, the placenta is all concentrated in the uterus or in that area, there's a higher concentration of blood, obviously. Thus, the more you could potentially have blood-borne pathogens. So in non-pregnant remains, the first place that you would assume that decomposition is going to occur. And non-pregnant would be, you would see the greening of the line, greening of the lower right quadrant, and also the lining of the trachea. However, in pregnant remains, the first area that will begin to decompose, obviously, is the lining of the uterus. Okay, we'll move on. So, the post-mortem conditions that could potentially occur include the following. Rapid blood coagulation. Well, we know with the increase of, especially in pregnancy, there's a lot of blood that's going through the female reproductive system. So the more blood, if there's an increase in viscosity, which is the thickness of the blood, of course that can lead to coagulation or clotting. Ascites, we know that ascites is the accumulation of fluid in the abdominal cavity, edema, and infection. Okay, I'm going to pause right here and I'll come right back with the male reproductive system. I've got to let the dog in, so I figured this would be a good stopping point. I'll post this one and then I'll come back with the male and female reproductive system. See you soon.